Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another episode of GitOps Guide to the Galaxy. I am Chris Short, host of Red Hat Live Streaming and showrunner. I am joined by Joshua Packer and Christian Hernandez, the GitOps guy. And we're going to be talking about multi-cluster stuff today, Christian.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about this. I've been meaning to get the ACM team on the stream, and actually, this happened completely by accident. Josh and I are wearing the same shirt.
Yeah, I mean, we planned it. That.
Yeah, no, we planned it. We planned it. We're so tightly knit here. No, I'm really excited to get Joshua from the ACM team out here. Josh, can you give kind of like a brief introduction of who you are, what you do at Red Hat, and what your role is with the ACM team?
Absolutely. So ACM is Advanced Cluster Management or Open Cluster Management. If you're looking in the community for us, we are all about cluster management at fleet scale. And under that purview, I work on, own, develop, cohesively connect and lead the teams that do both our cluster provisioning and lifecycling. So everything from creating clusters to destroying clusters to all the pieces that go in between. And then the application lifecycle, which is where the GitOps comes in. And that allows me not only to sort of work with applications and work with, what goes out into your fleet, but get into that space of, how do we define what the infrastructure looks like? We'll talk about it many times, the infrastructure as code, the single source of truth. And so, being attached to these different pillars within the product sort of allows a lot of this, what we'll see today, these sort of cross-referencing where we can use the single source of truth GitOps for managing everything in your fleet.
That's awesome.
It's what I like to call Josh is what I like to call the person I ask anytime I have questions about ACM.
I'm the go-to guy.
The go-to guy. He's the one I ask questions to. Is what I see it here.
And you might have seen Scott on another show called Advanced Cluster Management Presents on the channel. So I will drop that playlist in chat if you're curious about the topic.
That's right. So if you definitely catch that stream if you want to know all things ACM. I invited Josh really to the stream because we here on the show we talk a lot about GitOps, right? We talk a lot about application delivery and GitOps as a practice, and a lot of the times. So quick story. This is an old story because this is back when we can travel. And this is back like around 2018 where I actually did a Red Hat user group up in I think it's in Minnesota. And I was talking about Argo CD, and the one of the questions is that I got, that I used to get a lot was, it's like, okay, like this is great, like, but what about like my day zero stuff? Like how do I provision my clusters, right, in a declarative way? Mm-hmm. And I think GitOps as a practice, right? We all love GitOps as a practice, but I think ACM brings a very interesting aspect of going beyond just like GitOps and having multi-cluster management, right? Fleet management, and how to manage that with GitOps, right? Because GitOps as a practice is great. But now we're talking going up a level, right? Going up into like, okay, like, I'm doing my GitOps practices. I have, thousands of clusters, spread across, multiple environments. How do I manage that? And, I think, having a tool like ACM, having an offering like, something that manages the cluster with your GitOps practices is a very, very powerful thing. So now you have an end-to-end, right? Now you have an end-to-end of I provision my cluster, I manage it with GitOps, and I control the life cycle of that cluster. I can destroy it, I can upgrade it, I can apply policies to it. So don't want to steer too much thunder, but I think it's very important to talk about when we're thinking about GitOps, we're not only thinking about like the application delivery, but the whole infrastructure platform, your whole end-to-end solution as a whole. So I'd love to get your thoughts on Josh on like the whole end-to-end aspect of GitOps and multi-cluster management.
Absolutely. Well, so I'm going to touch back, Joe, just on one thing you mentioned, and it was a question we get all the time, and I'm sure it's a question some of the viewers on this have as well, is Red Hat, and we're wearing the shirts that say OpenShift
That's
GitOps.
right.
OpenShift GitOps is Red Hat's productized version of the Argo piece. And so the question in advanced cluster management we always get is, advanced cluster management had a way of provisioning apps and doing GitOps and Helm, which do I use? Do I use Argo? Do I use the ACM subscriptions? How do I make the choice? And the answer used to be, well, it depended what you were doing. That answer is still the same. It depends on what you're doing. But in both cases, we want you to use both. We want you to use them together. And what we're going to show you today is how ACM and Argo are like this. They're fully integrated. The ACM brings the fleet management that was sort of lacking from the Argo space. Argo is very much the, contained for the cluster that it's working on, or if you've gone out and you have a bunch of clusters, you still have to bring those in. ACM, we're going to see, brings all those pieces together and gives you that visibility into Argo that number one, we never had before, but number two, allows you to operate Argo and through OpenShift GitOps at scale across the fleet. So without further ado, maybe I'll grab a screen share and we'll get rolling. So hopefully it pops up. What we're looking at here is the ACM. This is the 2.3 release. It literally went out the door like 3 days ago, I think it was.
This is fresh. Yeah.
Exactly.
Like new here.
Right out the pipeline.
This is as new as it gets. So what we're going to do is
fresh off the vine.
Absolutely new. No. And so, as Christian mentioned, doing everything from day 0 on through day infinity with your cluster. If those of you familiar with ACM, I just navigated in from the welcome screen down to applications. And so what we see here, you see some labels that say Argo. We see some that don't have it. I'm not going to get into that just yet. What I want to target on here is there's this application that's deployed in ACM called infrastructure build out. And so the backstory in this is that I got an OpenShift cluster. I ran an OpenShift install. To be honest, internally, I just requested one and it came up. But you deploy an OpenShift cluster, you go to Hub. So you go into OpenShift's operator hub, you say, I want ACM. You hit the install button. In 7 minutes, you have an ACM cluster. At this point, I'm at this stage. I have no applications. I have no other clusters. I want to create my first application in ACM. And so I go through, I click the create. And what I do is I choose Git and I pick my infrastructure Git repo. And in this case, it's labeled GitOps Fleet Samples. So I pick my repo that has all the definitions for my security, for my configuration, for the clusters I want to provision, for the applications that need to go out to it. So all that with just this single infrastructure build out. And let's take a look quickly in Git here. We'll get it to pop out. I was able to build out a bunch of policies, provision some clusters, apply policy to those clusters. In this case, we actually go out and we deploy OpenShift GitOps, which is Argo, on all of those clusters as well. So what does that look like? So we see there's a couple of different directories. The one we're going to be interested in seed, and we were taking a little liberty with the naming. So yes. This is the directory that seeds all of the infrastructure pieces for your environment. But here it starts to get pretty simple. Anything under common is configuration that is going to be common to all of my clusters. So one example is the ACM policies. So things like I wanted OpenShift GitOps or Argo on all of my clusters. So I have a policy that's defined in Git that does that. I wanted to enable etcd encryption across all of my OpenShift clusters. So again, I have a policy and I'll click in one. It's a bunch of YAML. But again, if you've seen any of the ACM stuff, or you can go back and watch the Twitch channels on it, when I go into the UI and say generate a policy, I choose all the settings I want in the UI, I click that YAML button, and I've got that YAML that I can just paste directly into Git. And then that becomes part of my source of truth, part of my configuration that it gets applied by ACM to my entire fleet. But so again, you've got a split up of these seeds. We've got common configuration and policies. We've got those specific to our ACM hub. So configuration, apps, special cron jobs. Again, because this is a bit of a demonstration cluster to show a little bit of everything, we've got specialized cron jobs that in the evening put the managed clusters, so portions of my fleet, to sleep, so that I'm not paying AWS fee, GCP fees, Azure fees.
Shut down those dev environments when you're not using them.
Exactly. When we have we were just talking about a long weekend this weekend. It's the same idea, as we are able to turn those things off. And, if it doesn't happen from the GitOps, it can always be overridden from the UI. And so again, in 2.4, we finally bring, and I'm diverging here from GitOps for just a second, I promise, but I selected a cluster, and you see we have the hibernate and resume now as part of the user interface that you have access to control power states on your provisioned clusters again. But so back to the original discussion is, I created a single subscription. It brought in all the configurations, and it brought in all of these other applications. So it deployed ACM. We use this term called subscription, is our version of an application in Argo that is able to go to Git and pull in the Hello World app. Here, again, it did a mortgage app, and we pushed it to one system. But it also, again, I remember I mentioned it deployed GitOps everywhere. So I have our GitOps, OpenShift GitOps, which is Argo. So all of my managed clusters have a copy of Argo on it. So if I click into this, so number one, ACM knows, hey, there's an Argo app. So not only does it see the ACM mortgage app, the Hello World app, but it finds apps that are deployed by Argo. Argo, introduced from the Red Hat team, has this concept of an application set. All an application set is grouping a single application to many clusters. Similar concept that ACM has with our application, which is why we're able to display it this way. So we click into it, and so we see we've got this standard topology. We have some warning symbols, and we'll talk about that in a second. But so this is an Argo app. It's deployed by Argo. It's deployed with an application set from Argo. So if we click on this, it'll just take a second to refresh, hopefully. And we get the application set. We can see, I know it might be a little small. No, it's not zooming in, but you can see the Argo project reference there. Mm-hmm. So again, ACM building that topology, but this is strictly, for all intents and purposes, an application coming out of Argo. Now, I just want to show, for comparison purposes, I'm going to click on the mortgage app. And again, we can see exact same topology. Everything looks the same, except that little reference link I had for application set, that's missing. Now let's take it a step further. So we go back, we're going to click into the Nginx sample. Again, we have the application. So we can take a look here. Again, we see all of the different clusters where it's deployed. And we also see why there's a warning. There is a problem with the deployment on a single cluster. But if I'm going to click this, you can see it says launch the Argo editor. It's going to push me out. And this is the actual application definition in Argo that is running on that same OpenShift hub. So all that data that Argo has about the applications, it's brought in to me about the deployments. So let's hop back for 1 second. So again,
that's actually pretty cool for so you can imagine an administrator, administrating, a fleet of clusters, and the information of what the developers are doing, right? Their CICD process, the deployment process, right, in Argo CD bubbles up to the admin, so you can actually see kind of like a single pane of glass. So you don't. So as an admin, you don't lose that information, right? As your developers are doing things with Argo CD, all that stuff is coming up. That's really cool.
And exactly, and this is the piece we always push about ACM, is that this topology looks the same whether it's the 7 clusters here or 100 clusters or 1,000 clusters, but you'll see where you're having a problem. And so let's click it. We click on it. It takes us to the Argo, and this is the one that is having the problem. But
That's the problem.
Exactly. And it actually, the problem is I'm trying to deploy it on my hub cluster in a namespace that I don't have permission to, but I wanted an example to be able to show how we can dig down into it. But let me just quickly show a comparison. So this is that same, I pushed enter too quick. This is that same list. And so it's readable at 7. So you can see there is the problem, but then let's say we get to 10, the page is full. Let's say we get to 100. You're now scrolling through. Now, yeah, you can start to play with synced and unsynced. But again, the point is that ACM brings that fleet view when you're talking about hundreds of clusters, even 50 clusters, even 20 clusters. You're not scanning through that pages. And as Christian said, it's that much easier to just look at it and see where the problem. Now, this was an entire deployment problem where it didn't deploy any of the pieces to the cluster. But imagine it was just a route. You'll see just that one little icon. You'll know it's a route problem. You'll click on it, and then the list on the right, you're going to be able to tell exactly which cluster it has the problem on, and then click that, and you get the Argo editor. Same thing as ACM. The last piece, though, I want to show here is we've also demonstrated this for ACM before, is an ACM app. You can click on this without leaving ACM at all to see the YAML and the logs that go with it. That still applies to Argo applications as well. So we're still in it opened a new tab. That's why the screen flashed. But this is the YAML definition for that deployment there. And so you can scroll down and take a look at the status, etc., and see if there's a problem, as well as you can see the real live logs from the system as well. And that's without leaving the pane of glass of ACM. You didn't have to jump down into Argo. You get that information immediately. And then if you need to do something deeper, then you click on that application icon, you choose take me to Argo, and boom, you're in there. And so this is that scenario where you've got Argo running on the hub and it's deploying applications to all of your, to sets of your managed cluster. And so the question is, well, how do we make that easier? And one of the ways is if you've ever done it before, you need to run a command on the Argo CLI to import clusters into Argo. ACM in 2.4 does that for you automatically. In 2.3, we had a slightly different approach. We would import them as well, but you were limited to if you had only if you had more than one Argo running, it would only work with one Argo on your hub. But so now we use, and we've talked about this on some of the other streams, but we have this placement concept, which is really, I'll keep it simple, it's just label matching, is if your cluster has the right label, then ACM will import that cluster into a given Argo. And so you can have two Argos, for example. You can have one for configuration, and that could get all clusters you create. Doesn't, like all OpenShift clusters you create, doesn't matter whether it was for production, for test, whatever, it goes to, that one gets imported to the Argo that is for configuration. But you could have two other Argos, one for development and one for production. And in those cases, only the ones with the usage label production, for example, go to the production Argo. And all of that happens seamlessly when you provision. You don't have to do anything special. There's a resource we introduced. Here, let me pull it up quickly. There's a resource we introduced that allows you to specify that. So if I go back here to the hub under configuration, we see this GitOps cluster kind. This is just that. You specify the Argo namespace where the Argo lives, and you specify, again, I said this placement rule, which if we scroll down here is just the label match. So any cluster I provision that have the label usage and it's either production or development, Argo gets installed on. So again, that import step that used to be the manual piece, that's all automatic. If you have a bunch of OpenShift clusters and you have Argo and you want them imported into a new Argo because you just deployed ACM and you're making a new hub, as soon as you import those in, if with this resource created, those get imported into Argo and can now be targets for Argo. So again, any cluster you provision, you import into ACM can automatically become a target for Argo. And that's a big game changer from a fleet perspective, because that was a manual process up until this point with a bunch of CLI commands. You have to find the kube configs, etc. Now that's automatic.
That's really cool. That's really, really cool. Now it's like one button, push button GitOps, right? It's just like one button. It's essentially one button and it's all there for you. So that's really, really cool.
Exactly. Yeah, no, the Argo integration, it's gives us a lot of different possibilities, and it seems to be, at least for the time being, resonating with a lot of folks as well, which is what we always want to see. So now maybe we'll dive a little more into Argo integrations, because it doesn't just stop with the basic application sets. We wanted to bring these things. There's two more points, sort of major points I want to make, and then we'll do some cool provisioning, etc., doing through GitOps. but one is application sets. We were bringing ACM together with Argo. Application sets fits the mold of sort of you create one application set to many cluster concepts. And so, but again, it was limited to clusters and having a knowledge of clusters that are imported into the Argo server. And so what we did was we worked with the Argo community and we integrated our ACM placement rules into application sets as well in Argo. So that's an example here. So this is
which is really cool, by the way. The you're talking about the generator, right? The
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So I don't want to say your thunder there, but that was actually really cool. I saw. Well, because like I was a really big fan, right, of application sets, and as it's evolving, I saw on GitHub, I saw like a bunch of commits from Joshua. I was like, I wonder what Josh is doing in doing all these commits to application sets. So this is actually really cool of how the integration between Argo CD and ACM is happening through these generators. So I'm sure you're gonna go into that as well. So
absolutely. Well, that was what I just pulled up. So we talked about placement rules. Again, placement rules is this automatic, always reconciling way of defining a set or a group of clusters that you want to target for an application in ACM, for a policy, but now for an application set in Argo as well. And so we got that in, I want to say a couple months ago. So it'll be in the next release of OpenShift GitOps, which is the brand naming for Argo, but it's already available in the 0.2 community release of application sets. But what this allows you to do is we introduce this cluster decision resource. So before they had their own labels. So if you had specialized labels on an Argo secret, you could match it. But again, that doesn't fit well with it doesn't fit that well with I've got a bunch of managed clusters I want to target, and I'm already using placement in policies and other spaces. And so we introduced, and it's called cluster decision resource and not placement, because we were trying to, not just be ACM or OCM pushing our way in somewhere. This is actually a generalized approach. And so you see it has this concept, this idea of a config map reference. You define a config map that kind of says, what resource should I read for a list of servers? What parameters within that resource should I read for that list of servers? And then it takes the name of that actual resource. And so what that allowed us to do is, number one, it meant it could work with our placement rule, but it also meant that the folks at Flux, the folks at any other integrator that builds a fleet management solution would actually be able to take advantage of this change in application sets and use their version of placement. And so it was kind of our homage to, trying to help the community along a little bit while also building an integration point for us. And so what we do with this to ease the work along is you don't have to do any additional work when you're using Argo with ACM. ACM builds these config maps. There's actually two, because we have two types of placement rules. They build them automatically. So literally all you have to do is create an application set resource, tell it whether you want to use an ACM placement rule or the new ACM placement. So we have two types. Give it the name, and you don't need the requeue is sort of how often it checks. It's technically optional, but so just two parameters and the placement rule created, and boom, you're deploying to your clusters. Those same clusters that were imported into Argo using our other resource. You can even share the same placement rule between the two objects. And so for us, this was big, and we're not stopping there. And I don't have it to show you today, but I will plug a future, is that soon enough, we're going to have a application set create UI within the ACM space, because we're so behind it as a capability. And there is no application set UI anywhere else at this point either. So we're hoping to be the first. We'll see. It's coming up in the October timeframe. So we'll probably be back to show that as well.
Yeah,
hopefully.
There you go.
Yeah. Make our show planning easier. Thank you.
And the point being though is you can see it's a deep integration. We really anything we do with an ACM subscription, which was the native capability we brought and that we have in our community, we also wanted to extend because Argo is now such a part of the Red Hat strategy. We wanted to make a part of Red Hat and be able to do whatever we do in ACM, be able to do through ACM in a fleet with Argo, which will lead me to the last piece, at least around the Argo pie, that I'm going to talk about. And that is, we've talked about ACM in the past. Our application strategy, and I'm going to shrink down here a little bit, it was always a pull strategy in that you define a subscription on the hub. That subscription is propagated to your managed clusters based on the placement. And then each of those subscriptions on those managed clusters reached out to Git and pulled it down. The idea being the hub goes down, the subscription is able to keep processing. You can replicate that with Argo. And some of the recommended configurations are actually in that format. And to replicate that, what that means is you put Argo on each of those managed clusters. But then the question becomes, number one, how do I get my application definitions for Argo to those clusters to do that pull mentality, as well as how do I see that? Because Argo doesn't have a roll up across Argos today. And that's where ACM again comes to the rescue for today, but
yes.
tries that all together.
It's the peanut butter to the chocolate, right? It's the it goes together. It's the peanut butter to the chocolate.
It's it makes the Nutella in the
I guess it's right.
Not
exactly.
peanut butter, it's hazelnut, but
it's the Nutella to the 2 pieces of bread, right?
Exactly. And so that's this last one. And so here again, because I'm ACM and we're working with Argo, and this is a demonstration platform, as part of this infrastructure build out, it created an ACM subscription, which is, again, the subscription is able to go to Git and bring things down. It creates an ACM subscription using placement. So that, again, means to all my managed clusters that brings an Argo app. So an Argo application definition is being propagated to all my managed clusters using an ACM subscription. But that could have easily just been an Argo on the hub pushing an Argo application object to all those managed clusters. But what happens is when that Argo application object is created on those managed clusters, the local Argo that, again, at the very beginning, you guys saw me at a policy that said put Argo everywhere. So I've got Argo on every single one of my OpenShift clusters. That Argo on that remote cluster says, oh, there's an application object for Argo, I am going to deploy it. And so in this case, it's again another nginx app. And this is the special piece, the piece de resistance, someone might say, is that because ACM has these managed clusters and we've got this search collector that's out there grabbing data, it's able to detect that there is an Argo application deployed on a remote Argo. So there's no other information that there's an Argo remotely there, except for that fact that a policy put it there. But our search is able to detect there's an Argo application, that Argo application deployed, and hey, look, that same Argo application, it's actually deployed across all 6 of these clusters. And so it builds a group and puts, even though they're individual Argo applications, it builds a single topology because it knows it's from the same source. It's from the same Git repo. It's from the same branch in that Git repo or tag, and it's from the same folder in that Git repo in its definition. So even though these are 6 distinct Argo applications on remote clusters, ACM is able to detect that information and bring it back and display it just as we saw with the other ones. So we can see all of the different clusters it's on. We see the deployment under the replica set. We get the access again to look at the YAML and the logs. And so this is also when Argo, we talk about Argo everywhere, or that's the way I like to call it. When we have Argo everywhere, you may have developers that are using it. So as what you can take away from this is as they're off there creating apps, they're not under the covers. It's not going under any radar. ACM is going to be displaying that for your operations, for your SRE folks, in its application list. So you'll be able to tell that, hey, Christian's over there and, he built the Miss Pac-Man app instead of the Pac-Man app that I showed earlier on the remote cluster. And he thought, well, I was on the dev cluster and nobody was going to notice. Kind of ACM is going to bring those details back. So again, this application, although it's being realized and shown, as Christian said, on a single pane of glass in the ACM, it's actually only deployed in Argos on remote systems. It is not in any way on the hub instance itself. And that one is really the kind of cool piece. So it covers all of our possible scenarios. It's Argo. We've got ACM works with Argo running on the hub. ACM works with Argo everywhere. ACM can help you put Argo everywhere. ACM will detect what Argo is doing.
What Argo
everywhere.
is doing. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And bring that back, but also presented in a meaningful way, because, those, again, let's say, Christian and I both had access to three of those six clusters. So Christian had half, I had half. If I had put Pac-Man and I, again, use same GitHub, same branch, same piece on those three, and Christian used it on the other, ACM is going to say, hey, look, we've got 6 copies of the exact same thing deployed across all 6 clusters. Is that really what I want to do? The SRE is going to be like, why is it on 6? Knock, knock, Christian, why are you doing this? Knock, knock, yes. Josh, what are you doing over here? I see you guys are deploying, so there's a bunch of visualization help you get here too. And I say 6, but this works for 100, or, when we start to talk edge scenarios, we start talking about 1,000. And that's really where you expect to find not Argo on the hub targeting 1,000 clusters, but Argo on each of those single node clusters everywhere. And ACM, again, is going to bring back your application status, the fact that there are Argo applications there. And so, that makes sort of the trifecta of, we've got Argo on the hub, multiple Argos on the hub, or Argos out in your managed fleet, whichever way you want to slice and dice it. And it can be any combination of that, as well as using ACM subscriptions in there. We're going to display it. They're all going to look the same. It's going to be the same look and feel. There's no new learning curve, etc. It's all just there. And so, as an example,
it's kind of like what, to steal what kind of Andrew Sullivan sometimes says, it's not an or, it's a yes and, right? Like, yes, and you can do all those other cool things. And I like that you brought up the edge kind of use case as well. And to take that kind of like a little further, is that leveraging that multi-tenancy that you get with OpenShift, with Argo CD of multiple developer teams, being able to bubble that up right into ACM to, like you said, to have that policy driven, to have the SREs or have the ops guys be able to look and see, like, hey, like, we're having all these applications bubbling up, and by the way, I can see that and take action if I need to. So it's really cool. It's a yes and, right? So it's like, you can have it on the hub, you can have it everywhere. You can bring it you can bring it in from other clusters and see that information, meaningful information as well. It's really cool.
And the cool part is, there's nothing special. Like, there's no weird, like, you don't have to flip switches, anything fancy. If somebody goes out and deploys Argo on a remote managed cluster and starts deploying apps, we're going to detect that and bring it back. It didn't have to be a policy that I used just to put it everywhere. I just used a policy, so I had a single source of truth that said, I want to put Argo everywhere. So I defined a policy, and my placement rules said put it everywhere, and therefore it is. And so, there's that detection mechanism. There's no special switches. Anybody that's running ACM will get this, and gets this for free, and we'll start to see it coming up. And so, because I like to prove that I'm really doing what I'm doing, I'll click on this, which is, again, we're looking at the remote one. So it took us to the Argo. This is the remote Argo running on the other cluster. So if I click back here, before, remember, we saw I had lots of apps, and it was even in a different filter mode. There is only the one app, because this is a completely different Argo on the remote cluster. I'm not going to show URLs since we're recording this, although they'll be blown away tonight anyways. But you'll have to, I figure it's enough to see that there are no other apps. Like, I'm clicking here, we're not filtering. It's literally, it's on the remote system, versus if we scroll back through my tabs enough, maybe we find the other one I had. I think it was this one.
Yeah.
And here you see we've got all of them. This is the Argo that was running on the hub itself. And so, again, it's all these interactions, and we're just creating more and more of these pieces. And all of the details you see here, again, I mentioned it came through search. It's available, and you can deal with it through the ACM search, which is just amazing for remote management and sort of keeping an eye on your cluster.
Oh yeah,
definitely.
Cool.
See here, there is a question that Chris answered, but maybe you can expand on it a little bit, Josh, about the difference, kind of like the history between MCM and ACM I actually still get those questions at all. Like, well, is ACM MCM? Is MCM a replacement for like they're a little confused on that history, and you coming from IBM, could probably give us just a little brief history of in the differences if there's any.
Absolutely. So it seems like ages ago now, but I guess it was really only about 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
It was. So MCM was multi-cluster manager, and that is actually what became the open source code base that is now advanced cluster management. Although I think, as always, to confuse things, IBM still has an MCM product, but it is now ACM based. And I think they call it the cloud pack includes MCM, which is really just ACM. They use our community builds, and that is why we've actually, not the plug here, but we've expanded ACM onto Power and the Z platforms as well. So if you're running OpenShift Z or OpenShift on Power, you can take advantage of ACM as a management platform or managed 2 platform as well at this point in the game with 2.4, which is amazing.
So basically, ACM is MCM.
Yes,
right?
ACM.
Right.
ACM has replaced is the child of and has now become the new MCM.
Cool. Thank you. Sweet here. There's no questions. People like my metaphors, which is always cool. Well, chocolate and peanut butter.
Then maybe I will expand a little and we'll do a little more GitOpsy stuff, because this is a GitOps call. So we've talked about the Argo implementation. Argo, very big on Git, but also does Helm. ACM does Git, does Helm. Some of the different targets. Let's just talk about for a second. You can toward Bitbucket, Git. All of these can be Git Enterprise. These are on-premise or versions of Git that you can run as well, that you can target both these platforms to. I guess the takeaway before I get into some of the cluster provisioning cool stuff is that to take away from this is they're very interchangeable. We're highly integrated with both. We fully support both and will continue to develop both, because there are different places for each of them to be used, and they work great interchangeably as well, which I hope I demonstrated here. Especially we did, the remote Argo apps, they were deployed by an ACM subscription. So there's all kinds of different possibilities, and we'd love to see what people come up with as well. But we try to show at least that there are a number of different ways to do it. One that hopefully fits everybody's need, that they'll be able to pick, but they'll get a similar experience regardless, which is our goal.
Yes, exactly.
Are they following the same versioning? ACM with MCM kind of that transition?
I want to say they do, and they should be documenting as well under the covers which version of ACM they specifically are pulling in, which again would be the standard releases. So they'll be picking up at 2.3 shortly as part of it. And in the cloud pack in IBM, they use the ACM releases as well.
Cool. Good to know.
All right, so let's switch gears a little, and we're going to talk a little bit about GitOps provisioning of clusters. And so
that's great.
I've done some demos. I think they've been internal, although we've talked about it at least a little bit on some of the previous Twitch streams with the provisioning as well. But provisioning a cluster in Git is a pain. And the main reason it's a pain is you got secrets galore that you need to be able to make this thing happen. You've got a big set of configurations. And anytime you're using the word big, that doesn't actually do well with GitOps, because somebody needs to review big. And the more YAML there is, the more the chance that there is a sticky finger or a nefarious set of fingers that are trying to get something by. And so what you really want is, what is the simplest way we can provision a cluster? And something you get for free, and what I'm about to show you, is it's fast as well. And so I think I actually talked about this with Gurney on a previous Twitch, the ACM integration of cluster pools that come from Hive. So the background there is a cluster pool is literally a pool of one or more clusters that you the administrator pre-configures, that is sleeping in hibernated state, and that as you need, you are able to provision. And so in 2.4, I shouldn't say provision, you're able to claim, because it's already provisioned is the idea. And so in 2.4, we introduced UIs. And so here you see I've got a couple of different cluster pools created across a couple of different cloud providers, one in Amazon, one in Azure, one in GCP. You can see that each one of those has a cluster in it asleep. This is a demonstration, so I'm using single node clusters, but you can have 3-node master clusters that host workload, as well as 6-node clusters or 12-node clusters. The sky's kind of the limit. The cool part is you can have a bunch of different pools as well, and the only cost is the storage that are assigned to some of the drives in the providers, because otherwise they're off and they're asleep. But what that also means is within 5 to 10 minutes, I'll use that number. Within 5 to 10 minutes, you can have a functional cluster. With Snow, it's a little faster. When you've got 6 or 12, it takes a little longer for all the nodes to sync together. But literally, it's the time it takes for the thing to power up and resynchronize back together is how long it takes to get a cluster. But so why is this big news for GitOps? Well, number one is it's fast. Again, 5 to 10 minutes for a cluster, pretty cool. What else Cluster Pool does, though, is if I don't have a cluster in waiting, it will start to provision another one. So even though I've got one in waiting, I can request 2, I can request 3, I can request 4, and the pool will just provision those additional clusters plus one more that it'll just put to sleep for the next person that comes to order. And so there's no limit except if I hit a quota, which is we won't get into today. It's a whole other discussion. But
quotas, really?
Quota. Yeah, you want to limit somebody access, but you can claim a cluster. And so the key here, again, I keep going on and on about simplicity. So we look here, we see there's a cluster that can be claimed in AWS, one in Azure, one in GCP. I think we'll try claiming one in GCP. So we're going to do it from Git. So I'm going to come back here, get the list up. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it as a true split screen. So I'm just we'll do the change in Git, and then we'll flip back and we'll see how quick we can get the screens to sync. I thought I had the Git. There it is.
That's one of the things with GitOps is that sometimes like it works too well. I've always it's almost a complaint, right? With us that do a lot of demos and talk with customers. Is that I'll do a demo. I'm like, oh wait, like it already did it, but like I promised I already did it. It actually just works too well. Like I couldn't pause it. So
yeah, exactly. So I was going to split screen this, but my screen's pretty small that I'm doing the demo, so I'm not sure how we'll flip back and forth. But anyways, so I'm back in my same folder that I was before, except this time I'm going to go to a clusters directory, and I'm actually going to switch the branch also to cluster management. And so again, all GitOps terms, all things you do in GitOps, you define YAML, you define it in different branches in a repo, and then the GitOps story is you've got Argo or you've got an ACM subscription, it points to that branch, it points to that folder, it points to that repo. It's always syncing. You can choose when it syncs. You can manually sync it. You can time window the syncing. And that's key, especially when you talk about provisioning, because maybe I want to define it. I want to make the change. So here you can see we've got a bunch of clusters. But if we look at the customized, we've actually only deployed the 0.1 for AWS, the 0.1 for Azure, and the 0.1 for GCP. And if we flip back, I'm just going to close as I go so that this becomes quicker as we do it. You get carried away. You get too many of these windows. All right.
We can
always happens on a live stream. Always.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We've got the AWS, the Azure, the GCP. So these were all provisioned via GitOps. These 3 I built up myself outside, but these 3 came from the repo, from the GitOps, because as we saw a second ago, and we'll go right back, these were the ones uncommented in the repository. So I'm going to do an edit. I'm going to do this live just straight in Git. So we're going to do another GCP. So I'm going to just comment it out here, or take the comment out, I should say. And I'm going to put in my comment that says, except I have to use my Bluetooth keyboard because my other keyboard died on me. Provision JMP GCP 02. And so I'm going to commit this. So this is now committed. So the customize has now activated this additional piece of YAML. So if we go over here and we look, again, I was talking about simplicity. This is the simplicity. I have the name of the claim, which becomes the name of the cluster that we start to see in ACM. We have the namespace where the claim is being created. And so from an administrator point of view, this is a namespace where I've been granted access to create claim objects. So you can see exactly who's got what where. And then also I got some labels. ACM, any label you put on here will transfer to the imported clusters. So if I want to define it again as development, as production, as it needs OpenShift, GitOps installed, I put the labels on it here, and that becomes part of my managed cluster that becomes my possession, but then gets pre-configured by all the GitOps I already set up. And then the last one is I pick the pool. And again, this is going to be based on the namespace you've been given access to. There may be one or more pools. I like to think of pools in this regard really as templates of a cluster. So from an administrator perspective, the administrator took care of what this looks like and just gave it a name. So he defined it, or she defined if it's going to have one node, is it going to be an extra large or a 2x large, all those kind of things. And then and so then you commit this to Git. I just committed it directly. In theory, if you're doing true GitOps, I would have had this forked. I would have done a pull request and my administrator would have approved it, which merged it in. And so once it's merged in, the ACM GitOps is going to apply it automatically. Now, we don't see it here because I have it on a subscription, and we talked about synchronizations and time windows. If we go back to the subscription I'm using for this, which is the Snow cluster provisioning, because there's Snow, which stands for single node OpenShift, I have synchronization off. And so if we look here, we can
or reconcile off.
Yeah, we have the reconcile rate off because I didn't want it to automatically apply. But again, subscriptions, Argo, automatic reconcile, you have the option of both, whether it's ACM or Argo. Time windows, we call them time windows. So even if it's committed to Git, we can have it only apply on Sundays at 1 a.m. or any day of the week at 1 a.m. when maybe nobody's using it. Or using other systems. And that's when we want the provisioning to happen because it's going to hit a bunch of repos to deploy a bunch of apps. So again, you can use time windows, sync controls on top of the fact that you've got the Git as that source of truth that you're monitoring, you're controlling. And I remember there were like 3 things we had to set in that resource. So it's very easy to see, is the person making the submission choosing what we really want them to choose? And should I be letting them? And, did they use a name that makes sense? And they didn't have access to try and sneak in. I wanted to go to 4x large because I was going to run some Netflix servers on there as well, or Netflix containers on there as well. So, it really simplifies that process. So anyways, I am going to hit the manual sync button here for it, which should then give us a time update if everything is working. Come on.
So we got a question chat here.
Yep.
Can you do transformations to application? Like if you move them from one cluster to another, do the routes change? The storage classes get updated? How does that get managed here?
So it can, and it sort of depends on what you're doing.
Yeah.
So you can do it based on, so our placement determines where it goes. So you would you'd be able to use placement to move it from location A to location B. And then you've got access to things like customize, etc., to modify names, PVs, etc. When we get into PVs, I don't want to give away the soup of some of the stuff that's coming, but we've got a bunch of stuff around replication within the app so that you're able to move an app from location, a stateful app from location to location. But in the most cases today, if you want to deal with stateful, it actually has to come from a PV in a container that is separate to the main application if you're going to move it. And so there's a number of different replication strategies, both from ODF, which is Red Hat's storage, as well as it's called volume sync from the KubeBack organization that we're integrating with. So if you stay tuned, there is going to be soon, we're going to have a bunch of examples where we've got databases flipping from cluster to cluster type of thing and keeping the physical volume or the PVs in sync between them as we do that.
Yeah,
I wanted that 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Go back in time and give me that.
I was anytime. Yeah, actually, Chris, it's funny how you mentioned that. Like anytime, I talk about GitOps with someone. It's like, well, like GitOps is not really anything like new per se. It's like now we just have the ability to do the things we've always been wanting to do.
Exactly.
Exactly. Now we actually can do it, right? So it's not like this. Not like the idea is new or anything. We've been wanting to do this, but now we can. So it's really cool.
Yep. And so again, talking about things that happen. So I flip back to my cluster list and we can see that I'm getting, there's my GCP 02. This is the actual underlying cluster that was sitting there hibernated. We see that it's resuming and coming back. But again, we got that usage development pieces pulled over. So once it comes online and the manager goes to ready state, it's going to get my policies. etcd is going to be encrypted. It's going to get OpenShift GitOps installed on it again via the policy. After that deploys, all the applications that OpenShift GitOps knows about and is referencing, those also get applied. So, if we come back in about, I don't know, about 15 minutes or so, I will have all of these things that we looked at before in application that said 6+ local will now be 7+ local. And, all we did was define we wanted a new cluster.
We've been talking about turning off environments for decades to save money, and now it's just you did one commit.
That's exactly it. What's really cool is like just taking it step back is like you have a GitOps way to not only to provision a cluster but to apply everything you want to apply to this cluster, right? So then I either as like an administrator or a project manager, right, or even a developer, I can go and make a pull request to not only give me a cluster but then apply all the manifests that I want to apply, and then also that whole cluster is managed, has a lifecycle management aspect to it, all via GitOps workflows, which I think is just, it's just like you said, Chris, it just blows my mind, and that like how far we've come to where like now like we're like where we've always been wanting to be, right, for the past 10 years.
But I mean, even the past year with just Argo and ACM and everything else, right? Like the advancements that have come so quickly have brought us to this point where it's like we can do all that now. Wow.
That's great.
Yep. No, the biggest challenge I think is now for us as the dev team, especially in the GitOps space, is the simplification piece of it. Is we don't want it as 6 YAMLs, and we have to deal with how do you deal with, there's a whole different discussion around how do you deal with secrets with GitOps. The cluster pool for us is that perfect way of easy provisioning, obfuscate all of the mess of what the configuration needs to be. It's all predefined up front, which is what we're usually asked for. The developer doesn't really care. They just want either the large, the medium, or the small, and they wanted it yesterday. Well, now there is the large, the medium, and the small t-shirt size, and you get it in 5 minutes, which is as close to yesterday as I can get.
Yeah, that's right.
At least today.
Yeah. I don't.
But so it's the cluster's now online. It's in the pending import, which means it's being imported as it came out of sleep into ACM, and then soon enough the applications will start to roll down onto it, and before long it'll be configured. And so it's this for me is the real game changer. And just I know we've talked about it on this before, but pools for certain type of development scenarios where you need clusters all the time, it really is a game changer. And I can't say that enough. And if it sounds like I'm excited, but I'm pushing it, I use it in my daily, it's changed my workflow. Like I come in on a Monday and it takes me about 15 minutes and I've got the latest and greatest ACM deployed. It takes me under 10 minutes to get a 6-node cluster, 3 worker, 3 master, and then it takes me under 10 minutes to deploy the latest ACM build snapshot on it. And then I'm good. And you know what? If I find a problem on Wednesday and I need to try the latest one out, it takes me another 15 minutes, and I've got I start from scratch. I get a completely new cluster in less than 10 minutes. I deploy ACM to it. So any kind of development, and we're now applying it, and we're going off of GitOps a little bit here. We use it in our build strategies, etc. Like getting that clean cluster is like the nirvana, and getting it quick, it's a game-changing experience for developers that work in multi-cluster spaces all the time, and you're doing dev or you're doing test, and you need to spin things up and down at different versions, or you just need a bunch of clusters. Having that on demand is huge, and there's really no other way around it.
and you talk about like changing your day-to-day workflow, or like fundamentally change your work. Like that's kind of where what GitOps did with me, Whereas, I used to be an SA and I build demos and things like that. Whereas like now I just need a bare Kubernetes cluster, and then I can, I can basically go from like Kubernetes install to my demo working like in a few commands. Now this is actually taking that even a step further. Now, like now you automated the building of the cluster. Now I don't have to build it. And also, oh, by the way, in the application of like my stuff, right? Like, like my actual
absolutely
all that, yeah. So that's like you take that, like an extra step further, right? Now I don't have to, run OpenShift create cluster. Now that's all that's done with me. I don't have to do the OC apply -K to apply my demo. Like you've already done that in this.
No, you're absolutely right. And that I don't even include that in my calculation, but it's actually there. Is after I deployed ACM, I logged in, I clicked into application just like I showed at the, we come full circle at the very beginning. I write in my infrastructure build out. I choose Git. I paste in the URL. I choose the branch as, so here, I'll go through it. I literally do this. I choose GitOps fleet sample. It populates the branch, which I choose main. It populates, so this is just pulling it out of Git. I pick seeds. I choose, so this has been created already, which is why I didn't have to paste it. I was able to pull it from the dropdown. Usually I'll use the low reconcile rate because I don't need it to check that often. I just needed to check the first time. And then ever so often, it's every hour, it'll go out and look. I hit save and that's it. I walk away. And, I go and do my daily development. But then when I need a cluster, I'll have three, part of that GitOps flow is it went out and it pushed out the three clusters from a pool. It deployed a bunch of applications. My PM or Christian comes to me and says, Josh, I need you to do a demo. I didn't set anything up. This is the environment because it builds just as you said. I build it out every time. And, as we get new stuff, I need to patch something. You can add things in. It's, I check it into Git and my source of truth just, for my infrastructure code just keeps growing, but it's there and it's always the same. It makes it the same every single time. And I need to make a change. I commit it. If it doesn't work and I see something, I'm like, how did that get there? I go back and look at the commit history and go, why did my buddy here, John, check this in, make this change? That source of truth, that's the GitOps mantra. And, it's wonderful when it's working, it's wonderful. And it definitely improves setup configuration time. And there's a whole discussion on the side of like recoverability. If I need to rebuild an infrastructure, all I need is that single piece to start. And then once we start to bring in, Chris, as you were talking about with the PVs and stuff, it's the whole solution. It's like, build from scratch one command type of thing on a new, I just provisioned a new cluster. I installed ACM from the hub with 3 clicks. It's literally 3 clicks, maybe 4. And then I apply a subscription or I click in the hub and add Argo. And then I add an application set that points to that Git that is my seed. Like Argo could be pointing to that same seed directory as the ACM application set. It builds everything out. And that could be, my 6 clusters, my 60 clusters. ACM will attempt to do reimports. The sky's the limit. Like it's the infrastructure is code when it's realized, and especially as we try to sort of keep it simple so it's readable, it's game changing in a lot of ways.
No, it's definitely game changing, and it's also a while ago it changed my mind. Now I'm the preacher of like, well, let's keep your clusters as cattle, right? So like I think long is the days where people thought like you can install Kubernetes and treat it like a vSphere instance, right? And it's like that's not what it was made for. And now we have the tools and the abilities to like treat them as cattle, right? Like clusters as cattle. Like Shari here asked about moving applications, and it's like, well, it's not necessarily, your applications will move with everything, and it's not really necessarily a move in the literal sense, because it's a copy and destroy, right? It's kind of like the MV command on Linux. What it's actually doing is just copy delete versus an actual like moving of your application. So
exactly.
There was actually a question about support for vSphere, for the vSphere API. I know we showed a lot of cloud stuff. What where are you guys at with the vSphere IPI support?
So you definitely can provision with vSphere. We don't have the pools yet in vSphere. So
okay, cool.
VMware and OpenStack are the two that are in the works for the cluster pooling. It's there. So OpenStack and vSphere both provision a little faster than the cloud providers, and sort of storing on local is not always, it's more of a just, the pool just becomes a speed thing at that point. There really isn't the same kind of cost savings, because even if you're using a cloud provider for vSphere like Packet or something like that, you pay a fixed fee for the ESXi, whether it's empty or it's full. So suspending your cluster doesn't actually do you any good, but we're bringing it, and it's more so just because it makes these flows so much simpler, and you get this idea of sort of templating and being able to define what you need your administrator defines what the cluster, so the developer just says, I want the big one, or I want the small one, or I want the one that's in vSphere versus the one that's in AWS, etc. But so if you looked at, so number one, I just wanted to point out, like, we can see things are already starting to float over with the numbers. It did actually provision, but if we go back to the clusters and we do the create, so this is the current stack of provisionable pieces. So we have the AWS, the GCP, Microsoft Azure, vSphere, OpenStack, bare metal. There's also tech preview for the assisted installer, which is the ISO based for bare metal, but also I think can be used in virtualization. And then we also support the import. So I had clicked the create, but you can import your ARO, your ROSA, your AKS, EKS, IKS. I know I messed one. EKS. Anyways, all of them. Azure, Microsoft,
one of the
IBM. All of this. I guess we call it Star KS. You can or Splat KS. There you go.
It's talk about hybrid cloud, right? We always talk about hybrid cloud, and all the challenges that come with hybrid cloud. It's great to have like the single interface, right, to manage your hybrid cloud. I think that's the Chris, you said GitOps is a holy grail. I think this is like the nirvana of DevOps, right? It's like to have true hybrid cloud and be able to see everything with a single pane of glass is great.
And it's not just like, even if you can do a combination. You can have GitOps and GitOps for your configuration definitions, but you can manage all of your clusters manually in ACM, but as they come in, the GitOps apply, all the pieces of GitOps apply, because it's all just labeling. And so you can import those star KSs. This is another thing that was added in the 2.4 discovered clusters. You can, if you're and you already have 5 or 6 OpenShift clusters today that are not under fleet management, you can add ACM to one of those clusters. And then you use this page, you define your OCM credentials, and you'll get the list, and you can pick which ones you want to import. You can provision a new cluster, put ACM on it as I described. You provision OCP, go to the hub, ACM goes in 5 to 8 minutes, and then you can discover all of your clusters from the remote OCM, Open Cluster Management, online, and then pick which ones you want to import into ACM. So there's a number of different ways to put it all together. But then once it's together, you can start leveraging GitOps, and you can do that for everything if you want, like we demonstrated, and this demonstration showed today, which was all the way from provisioning these things to configuring them to loading out the applications on them. Or you can just use it for configuration, or you can just use it for the application management, and you can manually manage each of those pieces from the UIs, from the CLIs as well. There's a bunch of different ways to slice the pie. All of them supported, all of them working together. I mean, we did everything in GitOps today, but we viewed it all and looked at the topology through the single pane of glass. And that's kind of the key, is sort of bringing these two types of technologies together, that manual and the Git in such a way that it allows you to manage your entire fleet at scale.
Perfect. That's amazing. That is amazing. So we're here at the top of the hour. I don't see any more questions coming in. So Josh, I don't know if you have any final thoughts, any final words, before we close out here.
I was just going to say, if you haven't given us a try, give it a try. If you're using Argo, don't be afraid of ACM anymore. It's not an this or that. It's together we are better. And so, it's everything we talked about today is in Operator Hub. If you want to find the GitOps samples, look me up on GitHub, which is JN Packer, and it's everything we do is in the public here in Red Hat for the community and for the open source. And so you can see how it was done. You can try it out yourself.
Cool. Thanks. So cool. Thank you everyone for joining in. Chris, I don't know if there's another show coming up. There is not. So tomorrow, Red Hat, we have a recharge day, which is really great. I'm
gonna need that.
We have tomorrow off, so it's a long weekend for us Red Hatters. There's other companies that do something similar. I think Amazon has something like that. So for those of you who have a recharge day, please enjoy it. So next week, I don't know what we have coming up next week, Chris. I'll let you take that.
Something put me on the spot like that.
Yes, because
that's just okay. Remember, I'm ready.
After this, you have recharge.
Yeah,
there you go. So next show, I talk about RBAC with Argo CD. We tried that once, we failed. Failure's not an option. I'm gonna get back on the keyboard.
We're gonna get on it again. Yeah,
we're gonna get on it again. So look out for that in the next couple of weeks. So other than that, that's it. Thank you for everyone for showing up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh, and thank you to the audience. And stay safe out there, folks.
All right, cheers, everyone.